The bustling noise of the food court was suddenly shattered by a loud crash. A security chief, in his impeccable uniform and with the demeanor of someone who owned the world, had just furiously kicked a young girl's small sweet stand, scattering chocolates and coconut kisses across the floor. "You don't have permission to sell here, you brat. Get out of here before I throw you out," he snarled, pointing a finger at the frightened girl. It was then that a woman, dressed in simple clothes but with a firm gaze, approached. "There's no need for such aggression, sir. The girl is just trying to make a living," she said, her voice calm. The chief turned to her, a mocking smile on his face. "Ah, the defender of the weak and oppressed. What are you going to do, lady? Call the police. I am the law here. Now hands on the hood, criminal." He pointed to a parked car, expecting to see her tremble, but the woman merely stared at him, her calm unshakable. Slowly, she reached into her bag and, with a precise movement, revealed a silver badge that gleamed under the light. "Prosecutor, caught red-handed for abuse of authority and property damage. You are under arrest." The security chief's arrogant smile vanished, his face paling from angry red to a cadaverous white. His world, indeed, crumbled. Within minutes, he was handcuffed, tears streaming down his face as he was led away, under the shocked and satisfied gazes of everyone present. Justice, simply dressed, had prevailed. The silence that followed the handcuffed security chief's departure was almost more deafening than the previous commotion. It was a vacuum of sound where arrogance and fear had once reigned. Murmurs began low, like the hum of a waking beehive, and soon erupted into a cacophony of shocked and relieved comments. "Did you see that? She's a prosecutor. Serves that brute right." The food court, once a stage for humiliation, was now a witness to a small but significant victory for justice. The woman, whose name was still a mystery to most, but whose authority was unquestionable, put away her badge with the same calm with which she had revealed it. Her eyes, previously fixed on the retreating figure of the aggressor, now turned to the girl. The small vendor, still cowering behind what remained of her stand, watched the scene with wide eyes, fear slowly transforming into a mixture of awe and gratitude. Chocolates and coconut kisses, once colorful and inviting, lay crushed and dirty on the floor, a sad reminder of the gratuitous violence. The prosecutor knelt, ignoring the curious glances and cell phone cameras that were, no doubt, already recording every detail. Her gesture was disarmingly simple, contrasting with the power she had just wielded. "It's all right now, dear," she said, her voice soft but imbued with a firmness that seemed to dissipate any lingering threat. "What's your name?" The girl, her voice choked, barely managed to whisper, It's Sophia." "Sophia," the prosecutor repeated, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "I'm Anna. I'm so sorry for what happened. That man had no right to do that." Anna extended her hand and helped Sophia to her feet, her eyes scanning the destroyed sweets. The scene was painful. It wasn't just food. It was someone's livelihood, the hope of a day's work. I just wanted to sell my sweets," Sophia explained, tears finally streaming down her face. "My mother is sick and I needed to help." The girl's vulnerability was a punch to the gut, reinforcing the cruelty of the security chief's act. That man hadn't just kicked a stand, he had kicked a child's dignity and hope. Anna felt a pang of cold anger, but kept it in check. Her mission was not just to arrest the guilty, but to protect the innocent. "I understand, Sophia, and you were right to try, but no one has the right to treat you like that." She turned to the small crowd still watching, some with expressions of pity, others with curiosity. "Did anyone see all this? I'll need witnesses." Several hands went up and voices offered. Anna nodded, mentally noting the need to collect testimonies and ensure the case was irrefutable. The security chief, a man named Roberto, would not escape unpunished. His abuse of power would not be swept under the rug. That badge, which he had so despised, was the guarantee that the law would be applied, not just to punish, but to restore. "Don't worry about the sweets, Sophia," Anna continued, turning to the girl. "We'll sort this out. But first, I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning, every detail." The prosecutor knew the legal battle was just beginning. The arrest in flagrante delicto was the first step. Now would come the process, the hearings, the bureaucracy. And she, Anna, would be there every step of the way, an relentless shadow against injustice. The buzzing of the food court began to subside, but the tension, far from dissipating, merely shifted form. It was no longer the tension of confrontation, but of expectation. What would happen now? Would this isolated incident be just an endpoint, or the beginning of something larger? Anna, with her calm and determined demeanor, seemed to be the only one with the answer. She was the personification of the law, and the law, when simply dressed but with such conviction, was a force to be feared by the powerful and a hope for the disadvantaged. Roberto's world had fallen, but Sophia's, and perhaps many others, was about to be rebuilt, brick by brick, sweet by sweet. And Anna, the prosecutor, was there to ensure the foundation was solid and just. The silence, once a vacuum, was now filled with a new melody, that of cautious hope. Anna, the prosecutor, remained kneeling before Sophia, the small vendor, whose eyes still reflected shock, but now with a glimmer of admiration. The crushed sweets on the floor were more than just a loss. They were the representation of an injustice that Anna was determined to correct. "Sophia, I know it's difficult, but I need you to tell me everything in your own way." Anna's voice was a balm, firm yet gentle. "Don't worry about anything else now, just tell me what happened." Sophia, with trembling hands, began to narrate, her voice choked but gaining strength as Anna listened with full attention. She described how Roberto, the security chief, had bothered her before, always with veiled threats but never with such violence. Today he was particularly aggressive, demanding she leave, claiming her presence devalued the environment. The girl, with the innocence and resilience of youth, tried to argue, explaining she needed the money for her mother's medicine. It was then that the kick came, merciless, destroying not only the sweets, but also her small hope for the day. As Sophia spoke, Anna took a small notepad and pen from her bag, jotting down every detail. She wasn't just a prosecutor, she was an attentive listener, a protector. Her eyes swept across the food court, observing the faces still fixed on the scene. The buzzing had subsided, but the attention was palpable. Cell phone cameras, previously discreet, now openly recorded, transforming the incident into a collective narrative. "And do you have permission to sell here, Sophia?" Anna asked, her voice remaining calm. Sophia shook her head. "No, not exactly. I only come on days when the market isn't open to try and sell what's left over. No one ever complained before, not like this." The girl's confession did not alter the gravity of Roberto's abuse of authority, but it added a layer of complexity. Anna knew the defense would try to use this to disqualify Sophia, to paint the security chief as merely doing his duty. But the damage, the aggression, the public humiliation, none of that would be justified. Anna stood up, and her posture, though simple, radiated unquestionable authority. "I need witnesses," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the space. "Who saw what happened? Please come forward." Several people approached, some hesitant, others more resolute. A young student, a middle-aged woman, and an employee from a nearby store. Anna approached them one by one, asking for their names and contacts, and asking concise questions about what they had witnessed. She instructed them not to speak to anyone about the incident until they were formally contacted by the police or the public prosecutor's office. The prosecutor knew that the integrity of the witnesses was crucial. "You will be called to testify," she explained, her voice firm. "Your testimony is fundamental to ensuring justice is done. Do not be intimidated. As she collected the information, the sound of sirens approached. 2 police cars parked at the entrance of the food court. The officers, accustomed to routine minor incidents, seemed surprised to see the scene. A prosecutor at the center of attention, a tearful girl, and a curious crowd. A sergeant approached, recognizing Anna. "Dr. Anna, what happened here?" Anna, with her characteristic calm, summarized the situation. "Sergeant, the security chief of this establishment, Roberto Silva, was arrested in flagrante delicto for abuse of authority and property damage. He assaulted this young girl and destroyed her sweet stand. I have already contacted the public prosecutor's office. I need you to secure the scene, collect the necessary evidence, and take the aggressor to the police station for formal booking." The sergeant, visibly impressed by Anna's efficiency and determination, nodded. "Understood, doctor. We'll take care of everything." Anna turned back to Sophia, who was watching the commotion with wide eyes. "Sophia, the police will handle everything now. You'll come with me to the police station to formally file the report. Don't worry, I'll be with you the whole time." The girl nodded, clutching Anna's outstretched hand. The prosecutor felt the small, cold, trembling hand, and a wave of protectiveness washed over her. This incident would not just be another number in the statistics, it would be a case she took personally, an example that power, when abused, would meet resistance. As the police cordoned off the area and began collecting the destroyed sweets as evidence, Anna led Sophia out of the food court. The crowd's gazes followed them, a mixture of respect and relief. The simple figure of the prosecutor, beside the vulnerable girl, was a powerful reminder that justice was not an abstract concept, but a living force capable of manifesting itself in the most unexpected moments. Roberto's world had crumbled in seconds, but Sophia's, and that of all who witnessed it, was slowly being rebuilt, brick by brick, sweet by sweet, under Anna's relentless vigilance. The prosecutor knew the legal battle would be long and arduous, but she was ready. For Sophia, for justice, for the law. The buzzing of the food court, the smell of frying food, and the curious stares were left behind. The air, as they stepped out onto the street, was colder, laden with the weight of reality. Anna, the prosecutor, held Sophia's hand, the small vendor who now walked in silence, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if each step was a journey into an unknown and frightening world. The police station, a building with an austere facade and barred windows, seemed imposing, a labyrinth of bureaucracy and justice that, for a child like Sophia, was just another place of fear. "It's all right, Sophia." Anna's voice was a lifeline. "I'm with you. You don't need to be afraid." But the fear was palpable. It was the fear of the unknown, of authority, of repeated pain. As they crossed the automatic doors, the muffled sound of the interior swallowed the city noises. The smell of disinfectant and old paper filled the air, a stark contrast to the sweetness of the chocolates that lay crushed on the food court floor. The waiting room was Spartan, with plastic benches and neutral-toned walls, inhabited by a few figures with tired faces and untold stories. Anna approached the service counter, her posture radiating a silent authority that made the attendant look up from his monitor. "Prosecutor Anna Lucia, from the Public Prosecutor's Office. We are here to file a report of abuse of authority and property damage. The aggressor, Roberto Silva, the security chief, is already being brought here." The attendant, a young police officer, nodded, surprise evident on his face. The presence of a prosecutor in person to register an arrest in flagrante delicto was unusual, a clear sign of the case's gravity. He indicated a more private room, away from the curious glances of the reception area. Inside the room, a slightly less oppressive environment, Anna knelt again before Sophia. "This is where you'll tell your story to the clerk, dear. He'll write everything down. It's very important that you be as precise as possible, okay?" Sophia nodded, her voice still caught in her throat. With each memory, a new wave of sadness and anger seemed to sweep over her. Anna perceived the girl's internal struggle, the courage she was trying to muster. The prosecutor knew that the process of reliving the trauma was painful, but essential for building a solid case. While waiting for the clerk, Anna checked her cell phone. A quick look at social media confirmed her suspicions. The video of the incident was already going viral. The images, captured from various angles, showed Roberto's arrogance, the merciless kick, Anna's intervention, and finally, the scene of him being handcuffed and led away. Comments ranged from indignation to fervent support for the prosecutor. Public opinion was on Sophia's side, and that was a trump card. The clerk arrived, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on his nose and a tired but professional look. Anna explained the situation, ensuring that Sophia's testimony was conducted with the necessary sensitivity. The girl, her voice choked, began to narrate again, this time for the official record. Every word was an effort, every detail a pang. Anna remained by her side, a constant presence, offering a glass of water, a tissue, or just an encouraging glance. He said I was dirtying the place, Sophia whispered, tears streaming. I just wanted to sell my sweets to buy my mother's medicine. With each sentence, the prosecutor felt her cold anger intensify. That man had not only committed a crime, he had wounded a child's dignity, exploited her vulnerability. Roberto's case would not be treated as a minor infraction, it would be an example. Suddenly, a commotion in the reception area drew attention. Altered voices, hurried footsteps. Anna knew immediately. Roberto had arrived, and by the tone he wasn't alone. Minutes later, a lawyer, suited and with a leather briefcase, accompanied by a pale and visibly shaken Roberto, tried to approach the room where Sophia was testifying. Prosecutor Ana Lucia, I am Dr. Mendes, Mr. Roberto Silva's lawyer, the man began, his voice polished but laden with calculated urgency. I'd like to discuss the situation. My client is under severe stress. There's been a misunderstanding. Anna interrupted him, her voice calm but with an authority that brooked no argument. Dr. Mendes, your client was arrested in flagrante delicto for abuse of authority and property damage. The victim, a minor, is giving her testimony. There is no misunderstanding. There is a crime. He will have every opportunity for defense at the appropriate time. For now, I suggest you adhere to the legal procedures for the formal booking. The lawyer tried to argue, but Anna, with a firm gesture, indicated Sophia's presence. The priority now is the victim. Any attempt at intimidation or interference with the testimony will be considered obstruction of justice. I ask you to wait. Dr. Mendes retreated, irritation barely disguised on his face. He knew he was dealing with someone who would not be manipulated. Anna turned back to Sophia, offering a reassuring smile. The girl, though frightened, seemed to find strength in the prosecutor's presence. Sophia's testimony continued, detailed and moving. Anna mentally noted the key points, the nuances that would be crucial in the procedural phase. The legal battle was just beginning, but the foundation was being laid. The prosecutor knew that Roberto's defense would try to discredit Sophia, perhaps claiming she didn't have permission to sell, or that Roberto was merely following orders. But Anna was ready to refute every argument. When Sophia finally finished, exhausted but with a glimmer of relief in her eyes, Anna hugged her. You were very brave, Sophia, very brave indeed. The prosecutor knew the night would be long. The formal booking needed to be completed, the police needed to collect more evidence, and she needed to ensure Roberto was kept in custody, at least initially. But looking at little Sophia, who now seemed a little less frightened, Anna felt a renewed determination. That incident would not be forgotten. That badge, which Roberto had despised, was the guarantee that justice for Sophia and for all the unseen would be relentless. The silence of the police station was a prelude to the storm brewing in the courts, and Anna was ready to face it. Ina's hug to Sophia was a bond of humanity amidst the coldness of police bureaucracy. The small vendor, exhausted but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, clung to the prosecutor, finding a safe haven there. The night, as Anna had foreseen, would be long. The formal booking, the document that formalized Roberto Silva's detention, needed to be drafted with surgical precision, every detail verified, every witness listed. While Sophia was escorted to a more comfortable room where a social worker was already waiting to offer support and a snack, Anna met with the clerk. The prosecutor reviewed the girl's testimony, ensuring that the narrative was clear, coherent, and above all, faithful to the truth. She knew that Roberto's defense, led by Dr. Mendez, would try to find any loophole, any inconsistency to discredit the victim. But Anna was one step ahead. Make sure all details about the destruction of the stand and the suites are well described, Anna instructed the clerk, her voice low but laden with authority. And that Sophia's minor status and vulnerability are emphasized. It's not just property damage. It's an attack on the dignity of a child who was working to help her family. The clerk, accustomed to routine but impressed by the prosecutor's seriousness, nodded. Understood, Doctor. Everything will be recorded as you instructed. On the other side of the police station, Dr. Mendez was unsuccessfully trying to negotiate Roberto's release. The security chief, still handcuffed, was in a temporary holding cell, his once arrogant face now contorted in a mixture of anger and despair. He stammered about a misunderstanding, about following orders, about not knowing the woman was a prosecutor. But Anna's words echoed in the station. There is a crime. The prosecutor knew the pressure would be immense. Roberto's defense, likely funded by the security company or the mall itself, would have resources to try and suppress the case. But the viral video on social media was a powerful ally. Millions of views, thousands of comments, public outrage spreading like wildfire. That would not be easy to ignore. Anna checked her cell phone again, looking for the latest updates. The video, now with subtitles and analyses from legal experts, was a phenomenon. Journalists were already at the police station's door, eager for information. The story of Sophia, the girl selling sweets, and the relentless prosecutor had captured the nation's attention. Public opinion is a double-edged sword, Anna thought. It can help pressure for justice, but it can also create a media circus that distracts from what truly matters, the law. She needed to stay focused to ensure the legal process ran its course, immune to external pressures. As the clerk finalized the formal booking, Anna headed to the room where Roberto and his lawyer were. The door was ajar, and she could hear Roberto's exasperated voice. I can't stay here, doctor. My reputation, my job. Anna entered, her presence silencing the room. Dr. Mendez, with a forced smile, tried a new approach. Prosecutor Anna, with all due respect, my client is a family man, an exemplary professional. There was an excess, yes, but perhaps we can resolve this more amicably. Compensation for the girl, perhaps. Anna's eyes narrowed. Dr. Mendez, the law is not a bargaining counter. Your client committed crimes of abuse of authority and property damage, aggravated by assaulting a minor in a vulnerable situation. Compensation will be discussed in the civil sphere after conviction in the criminal sphere. And no, there is nothing amicable about kicking a child's sweet stand and publicly humiliating her. Roberto, who had been silent until then, exploded. I didn't know she was a prosecutor. If I had known, if you had known, you would have acted differently. Anna cut him off, her voice cold as ice. That only proves your conduct is selective. that you only respect authority when it presents itself with a badge. The law must be respected by everyone, Roberto, regardless of who is representing it or who the victim is. The prosecutor felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just about Roberto. It was about the culture of impunity, about the arrogance of power, about the invisibility of the weakest. That case for her was a symbol. The formal booking will be completed shortly, Anna continued, addressing the lawyer. Your client will be indicted, and given the gravity of the facts and the repercussion, I will request the conversion of the arrest in flagrante delicto to preventive detention, or, at the very least, more rigorous precautionary measures. The victim's integrity and public order need to be guaranteed. Dr. Mendez paled. Preventive detention meant Roberto wouldn't be getting out anytime soon. Prosecutor, please, this is an exaggeration. He poses no risk. He demonstrated aggressive and disrespectful behavior towards the law and human dignity, Anna retorted, unshakable, and the repercussion of the case demands a firm response from the state. Justice cannot be seen as weak or complicit. Leaving the room, Anna felt the weariness of the battle, but also the adrenaline of the mission. She knew the fight would be long. Roberto's defense would try everything to disqualify Sofia, to claim self-defense of the mall's property perhaps, or even to try a settlement to minimize the scandal. But Anna was ready. She returned to the room where Sofia was with the social worker. The girl, with a glass of juice in her hands, seemed calmer, but the trauma was still there, visible in her eyes. Sofia, you'll stay with the social worker for a while longer, Anna explained, kneeling again. She'll help you find a safe place to spend the night, and tomorrow we'll talk about how we can help you start over. But I want you to know that the man who did this to you will not go unpunished. I promise. The prosecutor felt Sofia's small hand squeeze hers. In that simple gesture, there was a trust that Anna could not betray. Prosecutor Ana Lucia was not just a public servant. She was the voice of the voiceless, the defender of the oppressed. And for Roberto Silva, the arrogant security chief, the world was about to crumble completely, brick by brick, under the relentless weight of the law. The storm in the courts was just beginning. Anna's promise to Sofia was not just comfort. It was an oath, a commitment sealed in the heavy silence of the police station. Every fiber of Ana Lucia's being vibrated with the responsibility of being the voice of that girl, and of so many others who, like Sofia, were trampled by the arrogance of power and indifference. That badge, once despised by Roberto Silva, was now the shield and sword that would ensure justice. While Sofia was led by the social worker to a more welcoming space, away from the coldness of the police corridors, Anna delved into the bureaucratic procedures that would give legal form to Roberto's downfall. The formal booking, meticulously drafted, was the first piece of a domino that was just beginning to fall. Every word, every comma, was a brick in the construction of the accusation. Anna reviewed it with the clerk, ensuring that the narrative of the facts was impeccable, unquestionable. The destruction of the stand, the public humiliation, the victim's minor status, everything needed to be there, explicit, irrefutable. On the other side of the police station, reality began to impose itself on Roberto Silva. In a temporary holding cell, the security chief, once imposing, now looked like a shrunken man, his handcuffs a constant reminder of his new status. Dr. Mendez, his lawyer, desperately tried to find a loophole, a formality that could reverse the situation. But Ana Lucia had closed all doors. There is no room for negotiation at this time, Doctor. Anna's voice echoed in the lawyer's memory, cold and definitive. The law was not a bargaining counter. News of Roberto's arrest, fueled by the viral video, had already spread like wildfire. Journalists crowded at the police station's door, cameras and microphones in hand, eager for any information. The story of Sophia, the small sweets vendor, and the relentless prosecutor had captured the nation's attention. The video, now with millions of views and thousands of comments, was irrefutable testimony to the barbarity. Public outrage was palpable, a chorus of voices demanding justice. Anna knew that public opinion was a powerful force, but also volatile. She needed to use that energy to push for a firm response from the system, but without allowing the media circus to distract from what truly mattered: the application of the law. Justice could not be hostage to popularity, but neither could it ignore the cry for equity. As the clerk finalized the booking report, Anna prepared for the next step: the custody hearing. There, a judge would decide on Roberto's continued detention. The prosecutor already had her strategy. "I will request the conversion of the arrest in flagrante delicto to preventive detention," Anna had informed Dr. Mendez, her voice devoid of any hesitation. Given the gravity of the facts, the abuse of authority against a minor in a vulnerable situation, the repercussion of the case, and the risk of victim intimidation, continued detention is imperative to ensure public order and the proper conduct of the proceedings. Dr. Mendez's face had paled. Preventive detention. That meant Roberto wouldn't be getting out of jail anytime soon. That misunderstanding he was trying to sell was, in fact, a legal nightmare. Roberto, hearing the news through his lawyer, felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. Despair turned into rage. "It's not fair. I was just following orders. They can't do this to me." His words were a pathetic echo of his former arrogance. The irony was cruel. He, who had used his authority to oppress, now felt oppressed by the authority of the law. Anna, however, was not swayed by the aggressor's laments. For her, justice was not about revenge, but about restoration and prevention. It was about ensuring that acts like Roberto's did not go unpunished, sending a clear message that human dignity, especially that of the most vulnerable, was non-negotiable. The next morning, the custody hearing would be the first major confrontation. Anna already anticipated the defense's arguments: Roberto's clean record, lack of prior offenses, the claim of excessive zeal or error in judgment. But Anna had her own arguments, solid as a rock: the video, Sophia's testimony, the cowardly nature of the attack, the attempt at public humiliation. She knew that the security company and the mall, to protect their image, might try to intervene, perhaps offering a financial settlement to Sophia in exchange for her silence or the withdrawal of the complaint. But Anna would not allow it. That case was bigger than mere compensation. It was about a system that allowed the powerful to abuse the weak, and she was determined to dismantle that impunity. As the night progressed, Ana Lucia felt the weariness weigh on her shoulders, but her determination was unshakable. She reviewed the documents one more time, every detail, every line. The image of Sophia, with her frightened but hopeful eyes, was the fuel that kept her steadfast. For Roberto Silva, the storm was just beginning. For Ana Lucia, the relentless prosecutor, it was just the start of another battle for justice, a battle she was ready to win, brick by brick, under the relentless weight of the law. The badge he despised was now the force that would bring him down. The dawn that followed that night of torment did not bring with it the lightness of a new day for Roberto Silva. For him, it was the harbinger of an even more furious storm. The badge he had disdained, the authority he had ignored, were now sharp tools in Ana Lucia's hands, ready to dismantle brick by brick the fortress of his arrogance. The city awoke to a frenzy of news. The video, which had once been a silent denunciation, now exploded across all screens, in all news reports. The image of Roberto kicking the sweet stand contrasted brutally with Sophia's silent dignity and Ana Lucia's unshakable demeanor. The police station, once a place of bureaucratic procedures, transformed into a stage for public outrage. Journalists jostled, microphones extended, cameras flashing, all eager for a piece of the story that promised to be the symbol of a justice that was late but relentless. Ana Lucia, oblivious to the media circus forming outside, reviewed the final details of the process. Every line of the formal booking report, every testimony from Sophia, every piece of evidence of the stand's destruction, everything was meticulously checked. There was no room for error. The custody hearing was scheduled for mid-morning, and Anna knew that this would be the first crucial confrontation. It wasn't just about Roberto, it was about the message the state would send to society. On the other side of the city, in a cold and impersonal cell, Roberto Silva felt the weight of reality crush his once unshakable self-confidence. The security uniform, a symbol of his power, had been replaced by crumpled civilian clothes, and his hands, once free to gesture orders, were now handcuffed. Dr. Mendez, his lawyer, had spent the night trying in vain to find a loophole, a legal artifice that could free his client from preventive detention. But prosecutor Ana Lucia had built an almost insurmountable barrier. "Prosecutor, please, he's a first-time offender, has a fixed residence, a job." Dr. Mendez tried to argue with Ana over the phone, his voice laden with despair. "Dr. Mendez, your client committed a crime of abuse of authority against a minor in a vulnerable situation, with wide public repercussion and severe moral and material damage. A clean record is not a free pass for impunity. Public order cries out for a firm response," Anna replied, her voice calm but with the firmness of a rock. "And the risk of victim intimidation is real. I will maintain the request for preventive detention." Roberto's arrival at the courthouse was a spectacle in itself. Escorted by police with a pale face and downcast eyes, he was a shadow of the arrogant man who had kicked the sweet stand. The camera flashes blinded him, and the journalist's shouts, "Roberto, why did you do it? Do you regret it?" pursued him. He could barely walk, stumbling over his own feet as he was pushed into the building. Ana Lucia, for her part, entered through a side door, avoiding the commotion, but not the gravity of the moment. In the corridor leading to the courtroom, she found Sophia and the social worker. The girl, still visibly shaken but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, squeezed Anna's hand. In that small gesture, Anna found renewed strength for the battle ahead. The courtroom was small, but the tension was palpable. The judge, a man with a serious countenance and keen eyes, took his seat. Roberto sat beside Dr. Mendez, his posture hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. Ana Lucia, in her robe, exuded a silent but powerful authority. The judge opened the hearing, and Dr. Mendez was the first to speak. He tried to discredit the video, claim a misunderstanding, an excess of zeal in protecting the mall's property. "My client is a family man, Your Honor, a professional who has always looked after security. There was an error in judgment, yes, but not a criminal intent. Preventive detention is an extreme and unnecessary measure that will ruin his life and his family's." Then, it was Ana Lucia's turn. She stood, her voice echoing with clarity and conviction. "Your Honor, we are not facing a simple error in judgment. We are facing a blatant abuse of authority, an act of cowardice against a child in a vulnerable situation. The video, which is already public knowledge, leaves no room for doubt. Roberto Silva, using his position of power, humiliated and assaulted a minor, destroying her only means of subsistence." Anna paused, her gaze sweeping the room, resting for an instant on Roberto, who now stared at her with a mixture of fear and hatred. "The defendant's conduct, Your Honor, demonstrates a total disregard for human dignity and the law. The repercussion of the case is a cry for justice. Society needs a firm response from the state, demonstrating that acts like this will not be tolerated. Roberto Silva's release at this moment would represent a risk to public order and, more importantly, a risk to the victim's integrity, who has already been traumatized by his conduct. I therefore request the conversion of the arrest in flagrante delicto to preventive detention as a necessary measure to ensure public order, the proper conduct of the proceedings, and to prevent victim intimidation. Justice cannot be seen as complicit with the arrogance of power. The judge listened attentively, his face impassive. After the closing arguments, he retired to deliberate. The silence in the room was heavy, interrupted only by Roberto's ragged breathing. He knew his fate lay in that man's hands. Dr. Mendez tried to calm him, but his own eyes revealed apprehension. A few minutes later, the judge returned. Everyone stood. The magistrate's gaze fell on Roberto. Considering the gravity of the facts, the nature of the crime of abuse of authority, the victim's vulnerable condition, the social repercussion of the case, and the risk of intimidation, this court understands that continued detention is imperative. Based on Article 312 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, I convert Roberto Silva's arrest in flagrante delicto to preventive detention. He will remain incarcerated until further deliberation. The judge's voice boomed like thunder in the room. Roberto Silva felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. His eyes widened in despair, and a groan escaped his lips. Dr. Mendez closed his eyes, his last hope shattered. Ana Lucia, on the other hand, maintained her composure, but a glimmer of satisfaction, not of triumph, but of duty fulfilled, lit up her eyes. The first battle was won. The storm for Roberto Silva had indeed just begun, and Ana Lucia was ready for every drop. The judge's voice boomed like thunder, but for Roberto Silva it was the sound of a world collapsing. The reality of preventive detention hit him with the force of a punch to the gut. His knees buckled, and a hoarse groan escaped his lips, not from physical pain, but from an existential terror. The cold, impersonal cell, which had once seemed a temporary inconvenience, now transformed into an abyss. He was no longer the arrogant security chief, the man of power who dictated rules. He was just a number, a defendant, handcuffed by the very law he believed he was above. Outside the courthouse, news of Roberto's preventive detention exploded like a bomb. The camera flashes, previously directed at him, now captured the image of Ana Lucia, leaving with the same serenity with which she had entered, but with a gleam of determination in her eyes. Journalists jostled, eager for a statement, for a detail that would feed the insatiable hunger of the media. The video, already viral, gained a new dimension. It was no longer just a denunciation. It was proof that justice, sometimes slow, could be relentless. The repercussion was immediate and overwhelming. On social media, Roberto Silva's name became synonymous with abuse of power. The shopping center, once an oasis of consumption, was now associated with the image of an aggressor. The security company that employed Roberto saw its reputation collapse in a matter of hours. Hasty official statements were issued, attempting to dissociate the company from its former employees' conduct. "We deeply regret what happened. We do not condone any form of violence or abuse." Roberto Silva was immediately removed from his duties. Empty words for a public that demanded more than mere apologies. Ana Lucia, oblivious to the external frenzy, was already one step ahead. She knew that the victory in the custody hearing was just the first round. The real battle was yet to come. The security company and the mall, desperate to contain the image crisis, would try everything. She anticipated the maneuvers, proposals for financial settlements for Sofia, attempts at silencing, perhaps even the creation of alternative narratives to discredit the victim or the prosecutor herself. Her first step was to ensure Sofia's safety and well-being. The social worker accompanying the girl was instructed to redouble attention, to offer all necessary psychological and material support. Ana Lucia knew that Sophia's vulnerability made her an easy target for external pressures. "Any contact, any proposal must be immediately reported to me," she instructed, her voice firm. "Sophia is not alone. The law is on her side." Meanwhile, Roberto Silva languished in his cell. The absence of his uniform, his badge, his authority was a harsher blow than any cell. He saw himself as an ordinary man, stripped of everything that gave him identity and power. The nights were long and cold, filled with thoughts of regret, anger, and a growing fear of the future. The image of Ana Lucia, with her unshakable demeanor and steely gaze, haunted his nightmares. He had underestimated the woman in simple clothes, and now he was paying the highest price. Dr. Mendez, his lawyer, was exhausted and frustrated. Preventive detention had greatly complicated the defense. He knew that public opinion, inflamed by the video and media coverage, would exert immense pressure on the judiciary. "Roberto, we need to be realistic. The situation is serious. The prosecutor has a very strong case," he tried to explain, but Roberto barely listened. His mind was in a whirlwind of denial and despair. Ana Lucia, for her part, delved even deeper into preparing the case. She didn't just want a conviction, she wanted a message, a clear message that human dignity was priceless, that power did not confer impunity, and that justice would be sought with the same ferocity with which injustice had been committed. She began investigating the security company's background, looking for patterns of conduct, other abuse complaints. That case, she knew, could be the tip of the iceberg. The prosecutor met her team, outlining the strategy for the evidentiary phase of the trial. Every witness, every document, every detail would be meticulously analyzed. The goal was to build a case so solid that any attempt by the defense to discredit the incident would be futile. She wanted Roberto Silva's sentence to be a landmark, a reminder to all those who felt above the law. Sophia, under the watchful protection of the social worker and with Ana Lucia's support, began to breathe a little easier. News of Roberto's arrest brought a mixture of relief and a strange sense of justice. She still felt fear, but Ana Lucia's presence, the woman with the badge, as she called her, was a beacon of hope. The prosecutor had promised that justice would be done, and so far she was keeping her word. For Ana Lucia, the battle was far from over. She knew the powerful had unlimited resources, and the fight would be arduous. But the image of Sophia, the violated innocence, the aggressor's arrogance, all fueled her determination. That badge, which Roberto had so haughtily despised, was now the symbol of a relentless force, ready to dismantle brick by brick the impunity that had so long corroded society. The storm for Roberto Silva had indeed just begun, and Ana Lucia was ready for every drop, every lightning bolt, every thunderclap. She was ready for war. Roberto Silva's cell was a microcosm of his new hell. The grey walls, the smell of disinfectant mixed with that of others' despair, the absence of any luxury or deference. The man who once dictated orders with a simple nod now cowered in a corner, his hands trembling, his mind in a whirlwind. Arrogance had been replaced by a paralysis of fear. He tried to relive the moment, to find a justification, but the image of Ana Lucia's badge, and then the judge's firm voice, were constant echoes reminding him of his downfall. The bland food, the constant noise, the loss of his individuality, everything contributed to dismantling the persona of power he had built. Outside, Dr. Mendez tried, in vain, to piece together a defense that seemed to crumble with each new headline. The media pressure was relentless. The shopping center, in a panic, desperately tried to clean up its image. The board, in emergency meetings, discussed crisis management strategies. The security company, for its part, had already fired Roberto and issued statements of repudiation. But the damage was done. The hashtag Justice for Sophia dominated social media, and the mall's name was associated with abuse and impunity. Ana Lucia, however, did not allow herself to be distracted by the media circus. Roberto's preventive detention was a crucial step, but not the end. She knew the real battle was just beginning. Her team, under her tireless leadership, delved deep into the investigation. Not just the details of the incident with Sofia, but the history of the security company, and more importantly, Roberto Silva's. And what they found began to paint a disturbing picture. Old reports, previously filed as minor complaints or isolated incidents, resurfaced. A former employee who claimed to have been intimidated by Roberto. A complaint of verbal aggression against a customer in a parking lot, suppressed by mall management. Small acts of abuse of power, previously ignored, now gained new light. Ana Lucia realized that Sofia's case was not an isolated event, but the culmination of a pattern of behavior. Roberto Silva was not just a man who made a mistake, he was a serial aggressor, whose impunity had been guaranteed by a system that prioritized image and profit over human dignity. "This changes everything," she told her team, her eyes shining with renewed intensity. "We are not just dealing with an abuse of authority. We are dealing with a pattern of conduct, an environment that allowed this to happen. The mall and the security company have a responsibility here." As Ana Lucia deepened the investigation, Sofia, under the care of the social worker, tried to rebuild her routine. Fear still accompanied her, but the feeling that she was not alone, that there was a woman with the badge fighting for her, brought unexpected comfort. The local community, mobilized by the story, organized a crowdfunding campaign to help her, and small donations of sweets and school supplies arrived. It was a reminder that, despite the cruelty, there was kindness in the world. But Ana Lucia knew that Sofia's vulnerability was still a weak point. She instructed the social worker to be even more vigilant, to report any attempt at contact or offer that might come from unofficial sources. Roberto's defense, or corporate interests, might try an indirect approach to silence the girl. With the new evidence in hand, Ana Lucia prepared the formal indictment. The document was meticulous, detailing not only the incident with Sofia, but also Roberto's patterns of abuse and the negligence of the companies involved. She didn't just want the conviction of an individual. She wanted to expose the systemic failure that allowed such behavior to flourish. The indictment was filed, and the news quickly reached Roberto Silva in his cell. Dr. Mendez, visibly dejected, was the bearer of the bad news. "Roberto, the prosecutor has filed the indictment. She's seeking conviction for abuse of authority, bodily harm, and property damage. And she's attached evidence of other incidents. The situation is much more serious than we thought." Roberto heard the lawyer's words as if from a distant tunnel. The reality of the formal indictment, with the list of crimes and the new accusations, was a devastating blow. He was no longer just the security chief in a misunderstanding. He was a criminal with a history, a predator who had been exposed. The fear in his eyes transformed into a chilling dread. For Ana Lucia, the presentation of the indictment was another firm step towards justice. She knew that Roberto's defense would try to discredit the new evidence, claim persecution, try everything to protect the defendant and, by extension, the companies that had benefited from his excessive zeal. Why, but she was ready. Every word, every paragraph of the indictment was a brick in the construction of an unbreakable wall of evidence. The evidentiary phase of the trial was about to begin, and Ana Lucia was determined to ensure that Sofia's voice and that of all other silenced victims would finally be heard. The prosecutor was ready for war, and now she had more ammunition than she ever imagined. Justice, for her, was not just a matter of law, but of reparation, dignity, and a future where the arrogance of power could no longer crush innocence. The news of the formal indictment, with the list of crimes and new accusations, struck Roberto Silva like lightning in his cold cell. The chilling dread that had previously only haunted him now completely paralyzed him. He was no longer just the security chief in a misunderstanding. He was a criminal with a history, an exposed predator. The imposing figure he had built over the years crumbled brick by brick under the weight of the evidence. Arrogance had been crushed, replaced by a hopelessness that corroded his soul. He tried in vain to find an escape, a justification. But Ana Lucia's voice, the image of the badge, and now the cold reality of the indictment were relentless hammers pounding in his mind. Outside, Dr. Mendez felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The prosecutor had not just filed an indictment, she had declared war. The new evidence, the reports of other incidents, transformed a case of abuse of authority into a pattern of abusive conduct, making a defense almost impossible. The lawyer knew that any attempt to discredit Sofia or the new witnesses would be seen as a dirty tactic, further inflaming public opinion and the judiciary. He needed a strategy, but all doors seemed to be closing. The pressure from the mall and the security company to resolve the situation was suffocating. But resolve what, when the case was already so exposed and the prosecutor so determined? Ana Lucia, for her part, anticipated every move of the defense. She knew the strategy would be to try to discredit the new evidence, claim persecution, or even attempt a financial settlement for Sofia, hoping to buy her silence and demobilize the case. But she had shielded Sofia with a network of support and protection that made any direct approach unthinkable. The social worker was on high alert, and any external contact with the girl would be immediately reported. The prosecutor didn't want money for Sofia. She wanted justice, a conviction that would serve as an example and reparation. Her team, energized by the new phase of the process, delved into preparations for the evidentiary phase. Each witness from previous incidents was contacted, their statements collected and cross-referenced with the security company's records. Ana Lucia wanted to show not only that Roberto Silva was an aggressor, but that the company and the mall had knowledge, or should have had knowledge, of his predatory behavior and failed to act. Corporate negligence became a central pillar of her accusation, elevating the case from an individual incident to a matter of institutional responsibility. As the prosecution gained strength, the shopping center and the security company were in a panic. The formal indictment, with the inclusion of corporate negligence, was a direct blow to their reputation and, more importantly, their profits. Emergency meetings followed one another, with corporate lawyers trying to find a way out. The idea of a financial settlement for Sofia was discussed, but the legal team warned that, with prosecutor Ana Lucia in charge, this could be interpreted as an admission of guilt and would not stop the criminal proceedings against Roberto. The only remaining option seemed to be to try to discredit the prosecutor or somehow minimize the gravity of the previous incidents. Sofia, on the other hand, began to feel the first rays of sunshine in her life. The community's crowdfunding campaign grew, and donations of sweets and school supplies were a constant reminder that kindness still existed. She still felt fear, especially when thinking about the approaching trial, but the constant presence of the social worker and the certainty that the woman with the badge was fighting for her gave her strength. Ana Lucia visited Sofia regularly, not just as a prosecutor, but as a supportive figure, ensuring the girl felt heard and protected. The prosecutor knew the defense would try everything to discredit the new evidence, claim political persecution, or even attempt an out-of-court settlement. She was ready for every maneuver. Her strategy was to build a wall of evidence so solid that any attempt at disqualification would be futile. The evidentiary phase of the trial would be a battle of narratives, and Ana Lucia was determined to ensure that the truth prevailed. She wanted Roberto Silva's sentence to be a landmark, a reminder to all those who felt above the law, and a reparation for Sofia and all other silenced victims. Roberto Silva's cell was now a stage for his own torment. The reality of the formal indictment, with the list of crimes and new accusations, was a devastating blow. He was no longer just the security chief in a misunderstanding. He was a criminal with a history, an exposed predator. The fear in his eyes transformed into a chilling dread. He tried to relive the moment to find a justification, but the image of Ana Lucia's badge and then the judge's firm voice were constant echoes, reminding him of his downfall. The bland food, the constant noise, the loss of his individuality, everything contributed to dismantling the persona of power he had built. The prosecutor was ready for war, and now she had more ammunition than she ever imagined. Justice for her was not just a matter of law, but of reparation, dignity, and a future where the arrogance of power could no longer crush innocence. The evidentiary phase of the trial was about to begin, and Ana Lucia was determined to ensure that Sofia's voice and that of all other silenced victims would finally be heard. She was ready for every drop, every lightning bolt, every thunderclap. The air in the prosecutor's office was charged with an electric, almost palpable energy. It wasn't just pre-trial tension, but the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. Ana Lucia, sitting at her desk with piles of documents around her, felt every fiber of her being vibrate with the proximity of the evidentiary phase of the trial. She reviewed every testimony, every piece of material evidence, every detail of the previous incidents that now formed the backbone of her accusation against Roberto Silva and, by extension, against the corporate negligence of the mall and the security company. Her team worked tirelessly, transforming the mountain of information into a cohesive and irrefutable narrative. Timelines, call logs, internal emails from the security company that revealed deliberate ignorance or minimization of Roberto's abuses. Everything was being meticulously organized. Ana Lucia knew the defense would try to dismantle this narrative piece by piece. They would claim that the previous incidents were isolated, that the witnesses were biased, that Sofia was a manipulated child. But she was ready. She had built a shield of truth so dense that any arrow from the defense would ricochet. Meanwhile, outside the walls of the prosecutor's office, panic at the shopping center and the security company reached a new peak. Emergency meetings now included crisis consultants, public relations specialists, and even lobbyists. Their reputation, once untouchable, was in tatters. The press, previously focused only on the initial incident, now thoroughly investigated the previous incidents, bringing to light stories of other shopkeepers, employees, and customers who had been victims of Roberto's arrogance, but who had never found a voice. The pressure to resolve the case was immense, but prosecutor Ana Lucia had closed all doors to a quiet settlement. She didn't want money. She wanted justice. Dr. Mendez, Roberto's lawyer, felt the ground give way beneath his feet. With each new piece of evidence presented by the prosecution, with each new witness who emerged, his strategy disintegrated. He had tried everything, from attempting to discredit Sofia, which was immediately rejected by the prosecution's protection network, to seeking procedural loopholes that could postpone or annul the case. But Ana Lucia was always one step ahead. The idea of a financial settlement for Sofia, once a plausible way out, was now seen as an admission of guilt that would only further inflame the prosecutor and public opinion. The only remaining option seemed to be a direct attack on Ana Lucia's credibility, a risky tactic that could backfire. Mendez knew he was at a crossroads. Either he tried a desperate maneuver or he watched his client sink without salvation. In the cold, damp cell, Roberto Silva was a shadow of the man he once was. Arrogance had been replaced by a paralyzing fear, and the certainty of his impunity by a chilling despair. The voices of the other inmates, the constant noise of the prison environment, the bland food, everything contributed to dismantling his psyche. He tried to cling to memories of his power, of when he could dictate rules and humiliate people, but the image of Ana Lucia's badge and the judge's firm voice were incessant echoes, reminding him of his downfall. He found himself trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake, and with each day that approached the trial, the dread intensified. He was no longer the security chief. He was just another number, an exposed criminal. Far from the darkness of the cell, Sophia began to see the light. The community's crowdfunding campaign had exceeded all expectations, and donations of sweets and school supplies were a balm for her wounded soul. She still felt fear, especially when thinking about having to relive the trauma in court, but the constant presence of the social worker and Ana Lucia's regular visits gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. The prosecutor was not just her lawyer. She was a mentor, a protector, a figure who taught her that her voice mattered. Ana Lucia spoke of the trial not as a frightening battle, but as an opportunity for Sophia to rise again, to inspire others, and to ensure that no one else would go through what she did. The date for the first evidentiary hearing was set. The news spread like wildfire, and anticipation was palpable. The media prepared to cover every detail, and the community to follow the unfolding of a case that had become a symbol. Ana Lucia took a deep breath. Closing the folder with the last documents, the confrontation was approaching, and with it, the promise of a justice long overdue. She was ready for every drop, every lightning bolt, every thunderclap. Sophia's voice, and that of all other silenced victims, would finally be heard. The air in the courtroom was dense, heavy with the anticipation of hundreds of gazes and the respectful silence that precedes major confrontations. The cold lights of the hearing room revealed the seriousness of the moment, reflecting off the glasses of journalists who filled the front rows, with their cameras and recorders ready to capture every nuance. The community, in large numbers, occupied the remaining seats. A sea of anxious faces, some with signs supporting Sophia, others simply there to witness justice in action. It was the first evidentiary hearing, the stage where the truth would begin to be unveiled. Ana Lucia entered the room with the composure of a warrior who knows her battlefield. Her gaze swept the environment, registering every detail, every expression. She wore an impeccable pantsuit, her upright posture conveying a silent authority that needed no words. By her side, Sophia, visibly nervous but with a glimmer of determination in her eyes, was accompanied by the social worker, who offered her discreet and constant support. The girl held a small cloth doll, a gift from the crowdfunding campaign, a talisman against fear. Then he entered. Roberto Silva, handcuffed, with slumped shoulders and a pale, dejected countenance. The arrogance that had once defined him had been completely replaced by a chilling dread. His eyes, once full of disdain, now avoided contact, fixed on the floor as if each step were an unbearable burden. The suit he wore seemed too large for his shrunken body, an empty shell of the man who kicks sweet stands and humiliates women. Dr. Mendez, his lawyer, walked by his side, his brow furrowed, tension evident in every muscle of his face. He knew this would be the battle of his professional life. The judge, an imposing figure with grey hair and a penetrating gaze, opened the session with customary formality, but the gravity in his voice was palpable. Prosecutor Ana Lucia was the first to speak, her clear and firm voice filling the hall. She did not raise her tone, did not make grand speeches. Her strength lay in the precision of her words. "Your Honor," she began, "the public prosecutor's office will today present evidence of a pattern of abuse of power, corporate negligence, and a crime that transcends the isolated incident. This is not just about an aggressor, but about a system that allowed him to prosper, silencing victims and ignoring warnings." With each word, the tension mounted. Ana Lucia painted a concise but devastating picture of the case, connecting the attack on Sofia with Roberto's previous incidents, which now formed the backbone of the accusation. She spoke of the responsibility of the mall and the security company, transforming the case from an individual act into a matter of institutional failure. The panic on the faces of the company representatives present in the room was evident. The most anticipated and feared moment arrived when Sofia was called to testify. She approached the stand, her small hands clutching the cloth doll. The silence in the room was almost deafening. Ana Lucia, with a gentleness that contrasted with her previous firmness, began to guide her through the events of that fateful day. Sofia, her voice initially trembling but gaining strength as she spoke, described the kick to the stand, the fear, the humiliation, and then the intervention of the woman with the badge. With each detail, Roberto Silva's image contorted. He tried to avoid the girl's gaze, but her words, laden with wounded innocence, were like arrows piercing his conscience. The public, silenced, listened to the story of a child whose dignity had been trampled, but who now, with Ana Lucia's help, found her voice. When Dr. Mendez began his cross-examination, his strategy was clear: to try to discredit Sofia, suggest she was being manipulated, that her memory might be distorted. "Sofia," he asked, in a voice that tried to be gentle but carried a tone of insinuation, "are you sure of all the details? Wasn't it perhaps a misunderstanding? Did someone instruct you to say these things?" But Sofia, to the surprise of many, was not swayed. She looked directly at the lawyer, her childlike eyes firm. "I remember everything," she said, her voice now stronger. "He kicked my stand, he made me cry, and the lady with the badge defended me." The simplicity and sincerity of her words were a more potent blow than any legal rhetoric. Ana Lucia intervened only when necessary, protecting the girl from leading questions, but allowing Sofia's truth to shine through. Roberto Silva, at the defense table, trembled. The mask of indifference he tried to maintain completely fell apart. Tears welled in his eyes, not of regret, but of overwhelming dread. He saw his world collapsing, not just from the current accusation, but from the avalanche of evidence Ana Lucia was about to unleash, revealing a history of abuses he believed he had buried forever. The prosecutor then began to present evidence of the previous incidents, testimonies from other shopkeepers, employees, and customers who had been victims of Roberto's arrogance, internal emails from the security company that showed the deliberate minimization or ignorance of his conduct. She was building a wall of evidence so solid that any attempt by the defense to disqualify it would be futile. The confrontation was just beginning, but the first drop, the first lightning bolt, had already hit its target. Sofia's voice, and that of all other silenced victims, now echoed through the corridors of justice, and Ana Lucia was determined to ensure that this echo transformed into thunder that would shake the structures of power and impunity. Justice for her was not just a matter of law, but of reparation, dignity, and a future where the arrogance of power could no longer crush innocence. The battle would be long, but the first moral victory was already secured. The air in the courtroom didn't just weigh, it suffocated. Every word from Ana Lucia was a brick, and she was building an insurmountable wall of truth around Roberto Silva. The prosecutor did not rush. Her voice, a polished steel thread, wove the narrative with surgical precision, unearthing not just one incident, but a history of impunity. "Your Honor," she continued, her voice resonating with authority, "the public prosecutor's office will not limit itself to a single act of cowardice. We will now present a pattern of abusive behavior, ignored, and in some cases, actively covered up by the very institution that should ensure the safety and well-being of its patrons and employees." Ana Lucia's gaze swept the room, pausing for an instant on the representatives of the mall and the security company, whose faces, previously merely tense, now displayed growing panic. She wasn't just accusing Roberto, she was exposing the complicity of a system. She then began to present the previous incidents. These were not mere mentions, they were detailed cases one by one. First, the testimony of a young electronics store employee fired after Roberto falsely accused him of theft, simply because the young man refused to give an undue discount. The young man, visibly emotional, described the psychological terror, the job loss, the stain on his reputation. Ana Lucia displayed internal emails that showed the employee's complaint being filed without investigation, with the justification that Roberto Silva was a valuable asset and his word unquestionable. Next came the case of an elderly woman, an artisan vendor, whose merchandise was confiscated by Roberto under the pretext of irregular space occupation. Despite having all her licenses in order, the woman, who could not attend, had her testimony read by Ana Lucia, describing the public humiliation and the loss of her livelihood for days, until the intervention of another, more ethical employee resolved the situation. Once again, Ana Lucia presented an internal memo that minimized the incident, classifying it as excessive zeal. Every testimony, every document was a direct blow to what remained of Roberto Silva's facade. He, who had previously tried to hide behind Dr. Mendes, now cowered in his chair, the handcuffs on his wrists seeming to tighten with each revelation. His body trembled uncontrollably, and sweat trickled down his pale forehead. He was no longer the security chief. He was a naked man, exposed with his past relentlessly coming to light. Dr. Mendes, visibly desperate, tried to intervene. "Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution is deviating from the focus of the main case, bringing up unrelated incidents without concrete evidence." The judge, with his grave voice, responded, "Objection denied, Dr. Mendes. The prosecution is establishing a pattern of conduct, which is relevant for characterizing intent and for evaluating the defendant's character. The documentary evidence and testimonies are clear. Proceed, Prosecutor Ana Lucia." Ana Lucia nodded, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. She knew Mendes was in a panic. The strategy to discredit Sofia had failed, and now the defense was being crushed under the weight of the truth. "And finally, Your Honor," Ana Lucia continued, her voice gaining an intensity that silenced even the lowest murmurs in the room, "I present the testimony of Maria Eduarda, a former security supervisor at the same mall, who resigned after numerous attempts to report the defendant Roberto Silva's conduct. A middle-aged woman with a serious but determined demeanor was called to the stand. She was not a direct victim of Roberto, but a witness to his impunity. Maria Eduarda described how Roberto used his position to intimidate colleagues, harass female employees, and even extort small informal vendors, threatening them with expulsion from the premises. She had tried to report these abuses to the mall management and the security company itself, but her complaints were systematically ignored or minimized. "I tried," Maria Eduarda said, her voice choked with emotion. "I tried to warn them. I said that one day he would go too far, that someone would get hurt. But they always said he was efficient, that he solved problems. No one wanted to listen until Sophia's story came out. Then I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. She presented copies of emails sent to management, internal memos detailing the complaints and the evasive responses she received. It was irrefutable proof that the system not only allowed but protected Roberto Silva. The representatives of the mall and the security company, previously pale, were now livid. Their lawyers whispered frantically, the implication of corporate responsibility hanging heavily over them. Roberto Silva could no longer contain himself. A loud sob escaped his throat, followed by others. He didn't cry in silence. He cried openly, shamelessly, without dignity. It wasn't a cry of repentance, but of despair, of a man who saw his empire of lies and intimidation crumble to dust before his eyes. The image of the arrogant security chief who kicked stands and humiliated people had been completely shattered. All that remained was a coward, broken by the weight of his own actions. Sophia, observing everything from the prosecution table, clutched the cloth doll. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now reflected a serene stillness. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a silent understanding that the truth, however painful, was finally finding its way. Her voice, Maria Eduarda's voice, the voice of all those Roberto had silenced, now echoed like thunder, shaking the structures of power and impunity. Ana Lucia, with the document folder in hand, looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the public prosecutor's office believes that the evidence presented so far is more than sufficient to demonstrate the defendant's pattern of conduct and the systemic failure that allowed him to act with impunity for so long. We request that the court consider the gravity of these facts as it proceeds with the instruction and subsequently with the sentencing." The judge, after a moment of silence, looked at Roberto Silva, who was now a heap of sobs at the defense table. The gravity of his gaze was unmistakable. "Dr. Mendes," he said, his voice cutting through the air, "the defense will have the opportunity to present its arguments and evidence. However, the court notes the robustness of the evidence presented by the prosecution. The session will be adjourned for today. We will resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The judge's gavel struck, a dry, final sound that sealed Roberto Silva's fate. The crowd began to stir, journalists rushing to the exits to report the news. But Ana Lucia remained motionless for an instant. She looked at Sophia, who gave her a small smile. Justice was not a solitary lightning bolt. It was an entire storm, and the first phase, that of truth, had been won. The thunder was yet to come, but the seed of reparation had already been planted. The next morning dawned with a different weight over the city. The air in the courtroom, which had been suffocating the day before, now seemed charged with an almost palpable anticipation. The corridors were more crowded than ever, journalists, curious onlookers, and even some of Roberto Silva's previous victims, who, emboldened by Sophia's courage and Ana Lucia's tenacity, came to witness the outcome. At the prosecution table, Ana Lucia reviewed her notes one last time. There was no more evidence to present. The truth was already exposed in its rawness. By her side, Sophia, dressed in simple but dignified clothes, held her cloth doll tightly. The fear from before had been replaced by a resolute stillness, the calm of one who knows that justice, though delayed, is on its way. On the other side, Roberto Silva looked like a shadow of the arrogant man who had kicked the sweet stand. His eyes were sunken, his face pale and swollen from the previous night's tears. Dr. Mendes, his lawyer, tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but defeat was already etched on his face. He knew the game was lost. When the judge entered, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was not just respect, but a reverence for the solemnity of the moment. He did not rush, allowing the weight of the occasion to settle. His eyes swept the room, pausing for an instant on Ana Lucia, then on Sophia. and finally on Roberto Silva. Continuing with the evidentiary proceedings, the judge began, his voice grave and thoughtful. The court has heard the testimonies, analyzed the documentary and testimonial evidence presented by the public prosecutor's office and the defense, the accusations of bodily harm, threat, property damage, and above all, the demonstration of a pattern of abusive conduct and moral harassment have been exhaustively debated. He paused, and everyone's heart in the room seemed to beat in unison. Roberto Silva began to tremble uncontrollably, a low groan escaping his throat. Dr. Mendes placed a hand on his shoulder, a futile gesture of comfort. "The court," the judge continued, his voice gaining firmness, "considers the evidence presented by the public prosecutor's office to be robust and irrefutable. The narrative of the minor Sofia, corroborated by the testimonies of the other victims and former supervisor Maria Eduarda, as well as by internal documents from the security company and the mall, paints a picture of systematic abuse of power and impunity that cannot be tolerated by this court." Ana Lucia felt a shiver. It was the thunder she had been waiting for, the validation of all her effort. "Given the facts," the judge declared, his voice resonating with the authority of the law, "this court finds the defendant, Roberto Silva, guilty of the charges of bodily harm, threat and property damage, with the aggravating factors of abuse of authority and continuous moral harassment. I sentence the defendant, Roberto Silva, to a term of 5 years of imprisonment in a semi-open regime, in addition to the payment of compensation for moral and material damages to the victims, including the minor Sofia." A murmur spread through the room, quickly silenced by the judge's gaze. Roberto Silva, upon hearing the word imprisonment, collapsed. It was not a silent cry, but a guttural scream of despair, the sound of a wounded animal. He tried to stand, but his legs failed, and he fell back into the chair, his handcuffs clinking. The security chief, who humiliated and intimidated, was now completely broken, a heap of fear and misery. Additionally, the judge continued, ignoring the defendant's collapse, "The court will order the opening of inquiries to investigate the conduct of the security company and the mall administration for their omission and negligence regarding complaints of the defendant's misconduct, which may result in corporate liability and significant fines. Justice will not be served solely by individual punishment, but by correcting the systemic failures that allowed such abuses." This last part was a direct blow to the representatives of the mall and the security company, who watched the scene with livid faces. Their lawyers were already preparing for a new battle, but the message was clear. Impunity had come to an end. The judge's gavel struck 3 times, sealing Roberto Silva's fate and, in a way, the future of many others. The crowd began to rise, journalists rushing to the exits to transmit the news. Ana Lucia looked at Sofia. The girl, with a small smile on her lips, clutched the cloth doll to her chest. It was not a smile of revenge, but of relief, of a peace earned. She had been heard, and her truth had prevailed. As Roberto Silva was removed from the room, still sobbing and resisting, dragged by the officers, his arrogant figure had been replaced by a specter of shame and defeat. He, who ordered people to put their hands on the hood, was now the one being led away, handcuffed, before everyone. Ana Lucia felt a deep satisfaction. It was not just a legal victory, but a moral one. Justice for her was not an abstract concept, but a living force capable of restoring dignity, giving voice to the silenced, and dismantling the arrogance of power. The thunder had arrived, and with it, the promise that even in the deepest shadows, the light of truth would always find its way. The seed of reparation had germinated, and the future, for Sofia and for so many others, seemed a little fairer.